is all about corporate culture, so it's a little bit of going to be an alternative type of a session. Winston Churchill years and years ago said, first we shape our buildings, then they shape us. So we've got this, so what we're going to dig into now is like structures and corporate structures. So I'm going to introduce you to a couple of folks. Harold, you're here in the room somewhere in Stowe. Yeah. Harold and Stowe, Harold Jarche and Stowe Boyd, good friends. You know, how would I introduce the Stowe Boyd, you know, disruptor of the piece, and Harold, another one. Inviting us all to be in the same room is really as a scary feat. It's dangerous, so I'll not say any more. You guys do your thing.
That media shape us. We make our tools, and they shape us. Modern banking is one of the first things that came along to start the Industrial Revolution. It predates printing. There's a whole torrent of great industrial tools that prove once again that the tools of industrialism is what has shaped our industrial world, which we are still in. It's not over yet. And remember that computers in this era, at least at the very beginning, were not a communication tool. They were number crunchers, which is why we call them computers instead of comm devices. This has created a world, these tools collectively have created a world that we've taken for granted. We are completely shaped by the experience of these media, and this is a world in which we have people working collaboratively for a long period of time in stable organizations, making long-term plans and working against those plans because the rate of change in the outside world has, at least until recently, been slow enough that that worked. But we're at a change point, and that change point is coming because of this. The internet came along. The internet has had an enormous impact, but more interestingly, perhaps, and looking at it from a financial viewpoint, the internet is the largest and most expensive human artifact ever created. The unexpected part of the internet turned out to be social networks, a way in which people could communicate directly one-to-one and build something completely different. And what this is leading to is a real change in how organizations, people are going to organize themselves in order to do work and accomplish their aims in the future. They're actually more like a city than an army. This is how businesses are already operating. This is already a change that we're seeing in the world, and now in the United States anyway, over 30% of work being done is done by freelancers, part-timers. I want to hand it over to Harold, who'll go back.
And then, much later, as Stowe was talking about with banks, printing press, is we got tribal, institutional, and markets, things like the Hanseatic League. And more recently now is that we have tribal, institutional, markets, and networks. So when you think about these, is that all of these things exist, but we have networks on top right now. Stowe was talking about, you know, what social networks, social media, what's happening. So the question that I would leave you with is that what happens when you have an organization internally that is more like a market, it's more like an institution. Outside, you have much more networked and connected. Is there tension between that boundary space? What happens? What is that doing internally? What's that doing with people who live, when they go home, they're in a network, and when they come into the organization, they're in an institution? And is there a dynamic tension? Is that fine? Are organizations as we know them, are they going to exist? Or are we going to see things like heterarchies, chaotic organizations, such as the first chaotic organization was the Visa when it came out from the banking industry, or things like hierarchy, which is a new term.
Adopt the winning strategies of the network world, which is agility, experimentation instead of long-range planning.
Thank you for your participation in this exercise. So, Sean, the floor is yours.
What I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit of our thoughts on a new model for corporate organization, which is interesting, picking up on something Omer said this morning about eudaimonic and hedonic wealth. 1970, by his calculations, was the peak of eudaimonic wealth in the United States, and since then it's been in decline. Possibly that's because our institutions and organizations are, started to be ill-adapted to our new environment. And there's another concept that I found fascinating, a physicist called Geoffrey West. If you haven't seen his presentations on cities and corporations, you have to watch this. We're obviously not going to watch it here today, but again, on the presentation, I've done a link to his TED Talk. And he talks about corporations being biological in the sense that they scale sublinearly. There is a limit to how big they can get. And if you look at biological systems or corporations, they all, and what does that mean, sublinear scaling? It means that they're asymptotic. They grow and then they stop growing, and they reach a maximum point, and then they collapse. Cities, however, scale superlinearly, which means that for every increase in of a factor of 10 in population, all the other factors, wealth, crime, a lot of the other factors increase by more than 1. So you get this exponential scaling, superlinearity. Again, this is a quote from Jeffrey. Why that might be, and one of the, I'm massively oversimplifying, but he talks about cities are full of crazy people. And they're full of innovation, and they're self-organizing, they're emergent. Stephen Johnson's book, Emergence, they're emergent. Can we create organizations that look more like cities, less like people or elephants? We do a lot of innovative things, we think, but we actually, in the core of how we're building our company, we're working on this model, which is distributed. You have all these these things that go with a network, and I'll just go through, cycle through these quickly. Community, resilient, emergent properties, fractal, adaptive, and and it's all about cooperation. So what does that mean in reality? Well, we called our firm Anthemis. Anthemis is a plant, it's a daisy, chamomile family. Things grow better planted near it, so that's a sort of an overarching theme for what we're trying to do. We have our own sort of Hippocratic oath. We try to help the people in our ecosystem, but first do no harm. So this isn't a heliocentric, we don't think we're in the middle of the world, but I've just taken a snapshot of this wider network.
I'm just going to throw a comment out there because the banks are really no different than any other big company, right?
Yes.
IBM, 400,000 people,
yeah,
run by an iconic CEO.
Yeah.
They don't seem to have that problem. So maybe the issue is within the banking industry and not within the culture of the management.
Okay, so I think there's some specific issues with banking that makes it particularly fragile in terms of the, banks are by nature definitionally leveraged. So there's sort of, I think you just see it more. But if you look at, and this is, I would really then recommend that if you're interested in this and looking at Jeffrey West's studies, you look at companies, he picked out Walmart as a good sort of archetype. Walmart continues to be enormously successful, continues to grow, but it's growing asymptotically. So I would sort of hazard to say that IBM is super well managed, it's working, but they will have a hard time, continuing on that path. There is sort of diminishing returns of complexity. No, but their growth rates are slowing. And this is getting away from the noise, but do you think if they were to continue to grow at the pace that they've grown on average for the last century, at some point they would be a 2 billion person organization? Some point not so far in the future. Do you think that's plausible?
No, not a chance.
Do you think it's plausible that you have a network, and our economies in some respects are already networks of companies and organizations, but there's a limiting factor on the size of a traditional hierarchy, so I would say in the case of IBM that they'll find the next 400,000 people a lot harder than the first 400,000 people.
Or they'll just manage better from where they're at.
Well, then I would be wrong. Or in terms of their growth in terms of people, and that is, as I said, this is provisional. This is our ideas, and clearly it's way too early to know whether this is valid.
So as we stand in this particular space today, one of the things I want to challenge is to stand up. Let the girl become a woman, the boy become a man. Stand up and stare at the structure and actually realize the change agent that you can be. Is that the reality of which you're in can change, and we need to remember who made who. We were the ones who drew those structures in the first place. We have the opportunity to redraw them and to rethink and to live differently. We've just got a little movie for you to watch. Laura, another disturber of the peace from Alcatel-Lucent, going to come and share some of her experiences and stories of how she continually disrupts her organization.
One of the things that Ben challenged me with when I joined Alcatel-Lucent was he said, look, if people are not coming in my office complaining about you, you're not doing enough to make change in the company. One of the things that I found in joining a large company was everybody had their specific thing that they did, right? And they didn't want to fail at it because that's what they did. And they were afraid to fail at it, so they couldn't help this person, they couldn't help that person, and it wasn't really a team because they couldn't fail. They had spent the last 20 years at Alcatel-Lucent terrified to death to fail because that's what they did and that's what they were good at, versus looking at themselves as being part of a bigger team. When I joined Alcatel-Lucent, it was, let's create a mission, right? The mission is we're going to change the service provider industry, just like we can change financial services institutions. You're going to bring them to the next generation. So we gave ourselves a mission, right? Save the whales. I knew I couldn't do it alone, so gathered some people. But it was a combination of people that had different skills. Right? One was shaping the team. Then there was the challenge of us versus them, right? Us being, of course, the outsiders, them being the people inside. Alcatel-Lucent had been there for a long time, and getting over that hurdle of the us versus them. How do you not say a lot of it was also keeping to drive the team. There was constant pushback. We don't want to be part of the team. You know, people are saying it's going to fail miserably. You can never change this industry, right? So you have to keep people motivated on an ongoing basis. And then you get some wins, and you have to make sure you celebrate those wins within the team. So you start with the individual and making sure the individual can fail, and they'd be, you know, it's okay if you fail. And then you're part of a team, and the team can also, the team might fail at some things, but you might succeed at some things, and then celebrating the wins. So my parting message is, just do it. And of course, if you have to, deny you did it or ask for forgiveness. Push your teams to make change. That's my message.
So I want to talk a little bit about how the past persists and how the past and technological paths continue to persist in our present and often seem to persist well into our visible future. One of the very practical problems that they were trying to solve with the Electoral College was how in the hell do you communicate in any reasonable way the votes from this vast, vast wilderness, you know, a vast wilderness. If you can imagine an area 3 times the size of Germany with only 4 million people, and with the technology that was available at the time, they needed to figure out a way to get that information to DC. And so essentially what they did is, within each of the states, there was a vote, and the geographic area of each of the individual states was kind of small enough they could manage the voting process. And then the electors would go to Washington and express the will of the people of the state of Virginia, express the will of the people of the state of New York. And that's how it worked. The interesting part is that we have had mechanisms to convey instantaneous information for a really, really long time. And yet still, in the 2012 election, the President of the United States will not be elected by the people of the United States directly. That person will be elected by an electoral college of people who are actually not the voice of the United States. And so the question is, how is it that these things persist? And I think if you look at corporations, a lot of the structures of corporations are also reflective of the technologies that were available 250 years ago. So this kind of structure, which I think everybody's sort of familiar with, where you've got, you know, the big cheese and then some very big guys and then some middle-level dudes and then the great unwashed masses of the company. The reason we have this pyramidal structure, in part, isn't just a philosophical one, it's also a technical one. It's that the communication mechanisms that were available demanded that you use this idea of an information cascade. And what I love about that phrase, information cascade, is that the water metaphor is quite useful, because water flows downhill. And the only time when water flows uphill is actually when you have a cataclysmic event, like a tsunami or a hurricane. And if you think about the way information flows in a traditional corporate structure, the only way that the voice of somebody at the bottom usually gets heard in the executive suite is when you have some sort of horrifying cataclysmic event. That's when water flows uphill. You live in this pyramidal, cascaded informational structure, and then you go home and you tweet about it. And what's amazing about Twitter, of course, is that there is no hierarchical structure that's implicit in it's a self-organizing network, and the nodes find each other. And sometimes information from an unknown node becomes burst up to the top of the screen instantaneously. My final message to you is this. The past tends to persist. We have the technology, and we in fact have the culture in our own lives to change the way information flows and the way companies interact. In fact, we do it all the time when we're wearing our civilian hats, but it takes a decisive action and a choice to fight against the history and change the way we act. Thank you very much.
Mark, please, you have the floor again.
Yeah, so we've talked about structure, we've talked somewhat about leadership, and we're going to shift gears and get into some more on human behavior at the moment.
What did you think when the lights went down and the music went up?
Technical glitch.
You thought it was an experiment?
It's an interesting comment. How long did it have to develop? Did anybody feel like there's just about a moment when they wanted to join in?
Well, you were having fun. I want there too.
Ah, okay. So what would have had to have happened to make you join in?
A formal invitation.
Uh-huh.
It seemed like it was the insider group dancing and the outsider group sitting here. So maybe more outsiders would have went inside than the rest of the outsiders would have joined.
Anybody else felt like, wow, would have been great to have been a part of the insider group. How do I become part of that insider group? What you need to think about is we have structures. We heard earlier about the structures of organizations are set up for certain behaviors. And what's happening is we're moving into different structures where we don't all know exactly what those new behaviors should be. And what it's going to take is as we heard from Laura and others, your own ability to say, what is it we need to be doing here? How do I behave differently than I traditionally have, than I've been told, than the organization wants me to? What we need is for you to feel comfortable doing something the organization didn't tell you to do, but you believing it's the right thing to do. And then you need an organizational structure that allows that type of playfulness. What we need is another set of behaviors that's not about efficiency and process, but it's about doing something different that hasn't been done before. And that's that innovative mindset you all to do, is to say, as an institution, whether it's a banking company or not, where do we fit into overall society? Why is it that people need us to exist? What is the social role of banking within this community? What is the role of our company in our relationship to the environment? How do we help others? You get people to rally behind those types of ideas, and you get people volunteering to help you. You get volunteers to want to be creative with you, to say maybe we can make banking a social change agent that people invite into their communities.
When you look at what makes people successful in organizations, and there's been a whole bunch of research done on that, what capabilities do you have to be successful within the organization and actually help yourself go forward? In the past, it was a lot about credibility and energy. And I think what we're finding in this sort of the new model with the internet and the connectedness that people have and all the social networking that's taking place, the Yammers and the Twitters and the Facebooks and all those, that what we're finding is that people anywhere within the organization can tap into those capabilities necessary for success. And what we're finding is that in that networked world, that you can create your own success a lot earlier, and it's actually being able to unlock that innovation within the organization and create something that moves much faster than it did historically. And actually what we're finding now with the sort of networking that's going on is that there's an opportunity to tap into something much faster and much more powerful by looking at things like social movement theory, which is how do you create a social movement within the organization and have it start from almost anywhere to tap into and create the next generation. What we're seeing is that you need to have much more of a learner mentality. Things are changing so much quicker right now, and that you need to sort of free yourself of the expert mindset that you have, free yourself of focusing on the past and what got you there. The key is in tapping into changing the behaviors, because nothing will change within the organization until you can actually change the behaviors. And in order to unlock those behaviors, you need to shift some of the mindsets that you might have within the organization.
And what I'd like you to do is to write one commitment of something that you've experienced today, or something that was said through that piece of advice, something that a commitment to change, something that you're going to do to become a better person, to create a better world within the organizations of which you work. So I'd like you to grab one of these, make a commitment, and post it to the wall at the back, please. Finally, connect with someone in the room again that you do not know and share that commitment. The benefit of sharing that commitment with someone else, and briefly, is that it has a greater effect on accountability and the ability for you to change. I'd just like to point out this quote on the wall. As for the future, your task is not to foresee it, but to enable it. That's why you're in this room. That's what this session is all about, is that you're a change agent in some formal structures, but it's our time to be able to stand up, make a difference, and we have the ability to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.